You know that argument? The one that starts with, hey, if we let this happen, then that's going to happen, and it just spirals down into some kind of absolute catastrophe? Yeah, that's the slippery slope. And today, we are going to figure out when it's a brilliant warning and when it's just trying to scare you. Let's get into it.
I mean, come on, we've all heard this 1,000 times, right? It's that classic line of reasoning that says one tiny, maybe even innocent-looking first step is going to set off a chain reaction that leads to some huge and usually terrible outcome.
And this is what's so tricky about it. Sometimes these arguments feel spot on, like they're predicting the future. And other times, well, they just feel like complete fear-mongering. So how in the world are you supposed to tell the difference?
Well, that question gets right to the heart of it. The slippery slope is kind of weird because it's a real chameleon. It can be a totally legitimate, valid way to reason about cause and effect, but it can also be a classic, textbook logical fallacy. So everything, and I mean everything, really just boils down to this one question. Is there a genuine, real reason to believe that taking that first step actually makes the next one more likely? Is the slope real, or are we just imagining a cliff that isn't there?
Okay, let's start with the one that usually sets our alarm bells ringing, the Surin fallacy. This is the version of the slippery slope that makes a gigantic leap. It just jumps from A all the way to Z, without ever bothering to show you the steps in between.
And this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The argument leaps from let's allow calculators straight to the collapse of modern mathematics. But what about that giant question mark in the middle? How does using a calculator on a test literally make people forget how to do basic addition? The connection is just assumed. It's never actually explained.
Now, the fallacious argument has a couple of sneaky tricks up its sleeve to hide that missing link. First up is vagueness. It lets your own imagination, your own fears, do the heavy lifting and fill in the disastrous blanks. The other trick is something called equivocation, which is a fancy way of saying the meaning of a word subtly shifts from one step to the next, so you don't even notice the logical gap you just jumped over.
But here is where it gets really interesting. The slippery slope isn't always a trick, sometimes, and this is what's so wild. The slope is very, very real. Let's take a look at how that actually works. And this right here, this lays out the difference perfectly. The fallacy just asserts a massive leap from A to Z. The valid argument, on the other hand, actually walks you down the path. It shows you how A leads to B and B leads to C and so on. It doesn't just claim there's a chain, it actually shows you the links. So the secret ingredient, the key to the whole thing, is this idea of a causal mechanism. This is the real-world, specific process that actually connects the steps. It's the how. It's the engine that's physically or logically pulling you down that slope. Let's look at a concrete example, drug tolerance. In this case, the slope is absolutely real because we understand the biological mechanism. You take an initial dose and your body adapts, developing a tolerance. That tolerance means you need a higher dose for the same effect, and that higher dose, unfortunately, can lead to dependency. See? Each step is clearly connected by a known physiological process.
And this is not just an isolated thing. We see these kinds of valid slopes all over the place. Think about legal precedent, where one court ruling literally makes the next one easier to pass. Or technological lock-in, where building our society around one type of tech makes it harder and more expensive to switch later on.
Okay, so this is all great. But how do you actually use this in the wild? How can you spot the difference? Well, lucky for us, there is a simple, incredibly powerful test that you can apply.
This is it. This is the whole ball game, the one question you have to ask. Forget the scary conclusion for a minute and just focus on the steps. Can the person making the argument identify the specific mechanism? Can they explain how A actually causes B and how B causes C? Because the answer to that question tells you everything. If the answer is yes, if you can identify a real, plausible mechanism for each link in that chain, then you are looking at a valid argument, and it's one you should probably take seriously. But if the answer is no, if the links are just vague hand-waving or it's just obvious, then you've got the fallacy in action.
And that leads us to a really, really important final point. You know, it can be super tempting to hear an argument you don't like, just yell out, "That's a slippery slope," and feel like you've won. But that's a huge mistake.
And this quote just says it all. Knowing the name of a fallacy isn't a weapon. It's not a trump card you play to shut down a conversation. It's a tool for evaluation. It's a prompt to dig deeper and actually think critically about the argument in front of you.
Because here's the bottom line. Some slopes really are slippery. And just dismissing a valid warning out of hand because of the way it's structured is just as big a thinking error as falling for a fake one. The goal here is clarity, not just scoring debate points.
So I'm going to leave you with this question. The next time you hear someone make one of these arguments, warning that a small first step could lead to disaster, what are you going to do? Will you just dismiss it, or will you pause and dissect it?